It's also, Richard, today is the worst strike in NHS history because consultants and junior doctors are on strike together. There'll be a lot of people very worried about getting ill today, Richard.
They will be, and I think that most people actually really understand that what doctors are doing today is in the interests of patients in the long term.
Will they?
I think most people do, because people realise that if you don't pay your doctors properly, of course your health service is really going to struggle. I mean, my partner's a GP, but lots of his friends are doctors in hospitals. And what I've really seen with them is that, if you're underpaid when you're working long hours, you can't afford decent childcare, you've got to commute for hours because you can't afford to live near work. So, of course, you're going to be knackered and not do your job to the best of your abilities. So the level of care that we receive is really closely linked to paying doctors and nurses and other hospital staff decently. And that's why
hold on,
is
Richard.
so important for the long-term health of the NHS.
A consultant, junior doctors, perhaps we should pay them a bit more. Consultants get paid £130,000 plus. I mean, that is paying them decently. That is, their wages may have gone down proportionately in the last little while. I support people's right to strike, I absolutely do. But at the same time, Penny from Essex has been in touch on text. Says, "Hi Peter, love your show. How on earth can the doctors say that because of their strikes it will help the NHS? This is ludicrous. They're depriving people who are paying for a service they're not getting. They're causing people to die and have blood on their hands. Not the caring profession at all," says Penny.
Well, I think that most people would agree that the long-term safety of the NHS, which means sorting out this mess, which has been caused partly by NHS staff being underpaid, that's the most important thing. And yes, short-term issues that the strike creates, they are very real, but surely most of us would agree that the government is not going to improve the NHS unless NHS staff force them to. And this is how they do that. This is the only leverage that they have.
It's not quite the government, though, is it? Because NHS England was set up. OK, yes, it's an arm's length body, but surely it has to operate within its budget, which is something like £180 billion. Surely they, NHS England, rather than health ministers and Rishi Sunak getting round the table, can negotiate this. There's been a failure here, hasn't there?
Well, Rishi Sunak and his colleagues have voted for and decided upon 15 years, well, no, not 15 years, 12 years of the real terms pay cuts that some doctors have had. Junior doctors, have just had consistent real terms pay cuts for all of that, I think. And, we can all agree that we should value doctors, pay them what they're worth. And the idea that, NHS England's totally arm's length and Barclay and Sunak have got no influence about what's going on. We saw what nonsense that was when they were trying to pretend
I'm not saying they've no influence
with the railways.
I'm not saying they've no influence, Richard. I'm just saying that surely NHS England and Amanda Pritchard should keep within their budgets and deal with this problem themselves rather than running to the government every time saying more money, which is, we're spending £180 billion in the NHS. Why is that it never seems to be enough?
Well, we've got an ageing population, haven't we? And that's just a fact. And lots of people in the government right now kind of want to be able to govern as if these facts aren't true, because they're all a little bit difficult. Like, there's the Ukraine war, we've got an ageing population. Yeah, the state has got to get bigger. We've got to start spending more money, because those are the main things that cost money in our society. We've just got to. There isn't really a choice about it.
There is a choice.
The question is, where does the money come from?
There is a choice in terms of the Ukraine war, and I would argue that we don't need to keep sending money hand over fist to Ukraine, but that's a whole other argument. Rob has been in touch. He says, maybe we should all stand outside on a Thursday evening and boo the NHS. Rob, I won't be doing that, I must say. Phil says, hi, I agree NHS staff are underpaid in certain situations, but it's not the doctors and consultants, is it? Says Phil. David in Cheshire says, if it wasn't all about greed and money and all about conditions and attracting more people to be doctors, would the consultants and junior doctors accept no pay rise to their huge salaries, but that all new applicants get a better pay and conditions deal, but the existing ones just enjoy better conditions and more new doctors? I wouldn't hold my breath for an answer. Or a 20% pay rise but zero private work, so more hours on the NHS, says David. Anthony in Yorkshire, actually on the next thing I want to ask Richard about, which I'm pretty sure we're going to disagree on. Anthony in Yorkshire says, hi Peter, Peter, I don't believe a word Sunak says until he revokes the net zero legislation. He and Labour are fully signed up to the green mania and will be back with a vengeance as soon as either is elected. Now, Richard, we expect to hear from Rishi Sunak this afternoon on net zero, the fact that there will be a softening of some of the measures that were there. What do you make of this from the government? Is this just flip-flopping politics, or is Rishi Sunak actually listening to the people?
Well, whether you think what he's doing is right or not, surely it's very obvious to us all that he's running scared of his backbenchers right now. You know, he knows this is terrible for business. He knows it will actually cost many consumers, especially in the long run. But he's scared of going into an election with the right wing of his party complaining. So he's caved in. And Tory MPs know this. Like, they're saying, this is anti-business. There was a former Tory official who worked to the right of the party and who used to be a fracking lobbyist, actually. She was saying today, this means the government doesn't have a positive story to tell going into the next election. Like, what are they doing? What have they achieved? Schools are made with killer concrete. The NHS has been ruined by years of cuts. Previously, they could have said, you know, we do have a positive domestic story.
It's not years of cuts to the NHS.
Mm-hmm.
When the Conservatives came in 2010, the NHS had £139 billion a year spent on it. Now it has £180 billion spent on it. That's not a cut. That's a huge rise. I'd love a rise like that in my pay from 139, let's say 139 billion to 180 billion. That would be wonderful.
I'd quite like a pay rise like that as well, though, as we've discussed.
But it's not cuts, though, is it, Richard? It's not cuts.
Okay, but so, I mean, that's not a net cut, but when we were talking about the NHS requiring more and more resources, and of course we're adding inflation on them as well.
Yeah, but it's still not 40 billion. I mean, they have absolutely put a lot of money into the NHS. It may not be in the right areas, it may not be spent correctly, there may be need for more, but you cannot say that the Conservatives have cut the NHS. They have not.
Okay, not on the absolute level, but loads of different bits of the NHS have experienced enormous cuts, and that's why the service is doing so incredibly badly. And previously, the government could have said, okay, we do have a positive story to tell about green policies, you know, but now they've made it impossible to invest in offshore wind, as we saw, which is such a cheap way of us.
It's not very reliable, though, is it, if the wind doesn't blow?
So actually, that's not so much of a problem as long as you've got an integrated grid. If you've got an integrated grid, then if the wind's blowing in the north or the sun's shining in the south, then you can get your electricity anywhere in the country and turn your kettle on or whatever. And at the same time, they're cancelling bits of HS2 and now this. So they just don't have that positive story to tell. And that's what Boris Johnson's intervention earlier today was about, you know.
Okay.
No fan of his, obviously.
look at you saying agreeing with Boris Johnson. It must be a new one for you, Richard.
Well, indeed, you know, I'm going to have to check my blood pressure later. But
well, I know someone who could do that. Your partner, and actually, I know you have a good sense of humour, Richard. So you won't mind if I read this out. It's not a particularly charitable message towards you, but I know you'll find it as funny as I did. Peter, who is this div? Put him in a cannon and fire him back at his rich GP partner.
Oh, well, that's very nice. I remind whoever wrote that lots of GPs actually don't earn very much money and they work incredibly long hours. I can confirm that. And on the same subject, you know, you had a couple of people, excuse me, I'm just going to have to do that. You had a couple of people who'd called in and said how much junior doctors are earning. Lots of junior doctors earn 35 grand a year, which, you know, is not nothing.
It's above the average salary.
It is above the average salary, but these are people who've trained over several years. They often have to live very far away from work. They work incredibly long, stressful hours. And ultimately, like, these are people who we're trusting literally with our lives.
With life and death. With life and death, absolutely. Richard, thank you. We've got to leave it there, but thank you for your thoughts, even though I disagree with you on many of them. I will not put you on a cannon, Richard. That would not be a nice thing. But I know you will have smiled at that one. Richard Power Sayeed there, who is a former Labour official,